Good morning, everyone. So my name is Oliver Ruebel. I've been part of the NWB Endeavor since about late 2016, and I'm currently together with Ben, the PI of the NWB project as part of the NIH Brain Initiative. I'm glad to see you all here, and I'm happy to also answer any questions you may have during the week. I usually end up pointing you to the right person in the room. That's usually my role. But I try to be as helpful as I can. So in this talk, I just want to give you a high-level overview of all the different components of the NWB Endeavor. Like Ben said, if you're already familiar with certain aspects of it, you're more than welcome to hack on your project. The Synapse room is available, or you can hack in here. And so I'm going to start with a very brief motivation. Since you guys are here, you're already motivated, so I don't need to motivate you what we're doing. So I'm going to keep that part very brief and then just go over, what is NWB, give you a quick introduction of our tool ecosystem, and then talk a little bit about some of the energy barriers of standardization, what we're going to do about them. And so why are we doing what we're doing? So first of all, neuroscience data is really expensive to collect, and we want to make the most out of it. And the way we get most out of it is by being able to reuse the data and having the ability to collaborate with each other. And at the same time, sharing neurophysiology data within labs, but also in particular across labs and with collaborators is hard, in particular when everybody's using different standards and means of communication. If you have different standards, some metadata that is required for interpretation may be missing, or is stored in ways that you cannot access it. And so by developing NWB as a common standard, it makes it easier for you to communicate with each other. And then finally, scientific results and analysis are hard to reproduce and compare when you do not have a common language of communication. That's really what data standards are. They're just a means for you to communicate through data. And so really our goal is, by developing these standards, is to bring the community closer together and allow you all to work with each other. It's ultimately not about the tools, it's about the people. And we hope that we can contribute to bringing the community closer together. Right? And one of the key challenges in this kind of endeavor is really the diversity of experiments and the rate of innovation that we see in the community. Right, we have a large diversity of different species that are being used in neurophysiology, ranging from worms to rats, rodents, human data, large range of different modalities that we have to deal with, from optical physiology, electrophysiology, both intracellular, extracellular physiology, and the large range of different signals that comes from these devices and the different analysis technologies that underpin them. And so really, dealing with this diversity and enabling all of us to work with each other is one of the key challenges that we need to overcome. Right. And so what is NWB? First of all, NWB is a unified data standard for neurophysiology. And so NWB defines technologies that allow us to store all the data from a neurophysiology experiment session in a coherent way that includes recordings of the neural activities for extracellular, intracellular, and optical physiology, information about the data acquisition, information about the experiment design, such as the stimuli and trial structure, metadata about the environment, information about the subject involved, as well as recording of the behavior. And then, as Ben already mentioned, for cases where you might have data that we don't support yet, or there's additional metadata that you're collecting that is not yet incorporated in the standard, you can create your own extensions to the standard so that you can adopt NWB even if there is a certain part of your experiment that is not yet covered by us. And so with this, NWB allows you to store multimodal raw and processed data in a coherent structure and container. And so in this example, you see an experiment where the scientists collect both electrical and optical physiology data simultaneously. and both of those modalities are stored in the same NWB file, and then the data is being processed through the primary processing pipelines in electrophysiology through spike sorting, and then for the optical physiology through image segmentation, RI detection, and extraction of fluorescence traces. And again, that processing data can go back into the same NWB file. And all the data is time-aligned at that point so that you can analyze it easily in a coherent fashion, which you see as an example at the bottom, where you have both the optical physiology data from a single selected neuron, as well as then the corresponding electrophysiology signal. And so you can easily browse and correlate that data because it is stored in a consistent structure. And then at the same time, there's a large number of tools that then can access and use that data appropriately. Right? But NWB is more than just a data standard. It's really a software ecosystem for neuroscience data standardization. And so there's a broad range of tools that we're developing and providing alongside with the standard to enable you to really make the most use of it. Many of you are focused on data conversion, so the first set of tools that you're probably going to encounter are our data conversion tools, which is NeuroConf, which is a library for converting a large number of proprietary data formats directly into NWB. For the first time here this year is NWB Guide, which is a graphic user interface for doing data entry using NeuroConf. And then we have the NWB Inspector, which is a validation tool that allows you to inspect your data for best practices and ensure that your data meets the NWB quality standards. The next set of tools that you're likely going to encounter are data APIs, which are PyNWB for Python and MatNWB for MATLAB. Those tools you will encounter as soon as you have any particular data types that are not supported through the automated conversion tools yet, or if you want to use data, let's say from Dandy, you will use the APIs. And then as we keep progressing, we're getting deeper and deeper into the ecosystem. So we also have a broad range of tools that I mentioned for extension that includes things like our extension catalog, which is a online catalog for sharing extensions. So when you create a new extension, you can publish it there and share it with the community. It also includes tools for creating new extensions, such as our extension template and documentation utilities. And as you keep diving deeper, then you get to the level of data schema. So these are the formal structures that describe our data standard. And so you will get in touch with those when you start writing extensions. And then finally, the level that most of you probably, hopefully don't have to touch are our data modeling level. So this is really the software that underpins a lot of our development, but is really at the level where, if you're a software developer, you will get in touch with these, but as a front user where you do data conversions, you will likely not have to directly dive into those levels. Right? But, this is just the ecosystem that we are developing, but really NWB technologies are at the heart of the neurodata lifecycle. And so data standards are really a critical conduit that facilitate the flow of data throughout the lifecycle. And they enable the integration of data and software across these different phases of the lifecycle, from planning of the experiment, data acquisition, processing, analysis, to publication and reuse. And so again, data standards are really, can think of it as the language that we use to talk with each other through data. But what it really means is that NWB needs to support the needs of an integration across technologies from the data lifecycle. And so our goal is always to work with the existing and emerging technologies, not to compete with them. Right? And then finally, NWB is a data standard for the data that's being generated from neurophysiology experiment. It's just not a standard of experiments, where our goal is not to dictate how people are doing experiments and what type of experiments to do. Our goal is to help you communicate the data that you're generating through your experiments. Right? And so a key aspect of the NWB Endeavor then is all the data analysis, visualization, and management tools that the community is developing and integrating with the standard. not just the tools that we're developing to directly support the standard. And so just a very quick overview, right? It starts with very high-level tools for data exploration, such as the NWB widgets, which allow you to browse an NWB file. Similarly, NWB Explorer is an online tool that will allow you to browse and program against NWB files. NeuroSift is a fairly recent tool that allows you to visualize your data in the browser through NWB files. And then there's also a broad collection of tools that are generic, that apply to HDF5, that are useful often for debugging and other purposes. And then, getting a little bit more specific, but still broadly applicable, are data management tools such as Data Join, which allows you to manage data pipelines. You have Dandy Archive, which allows you to publish your data. And then Pineapple is a data analysis suite that allows you to analyze a broad range of different data modalities. Right? Then we have extracellular electrophysiology. Here we have tools such as OpenEphys, which allows you to record and visualize electrophysiology data. There's tools like Spike Interface, which really makes it easy to use a broad range of different spike sorters with NWB and is also used for data conversion. And then we have tools such as SelectBorer and EcogViz, which allow you to visualize and analyze the extracellular electrophysiology data. On the intracellular electrophysiology side, there are tools like MEES, which is a recording utility for intracellular EPHIS data, as well as visualization tools for that data, and PatchView, which is more targeted towards the visualization and analysis of the intracellular EPHIS data. There's a large number of growing tools in the optical physiology space, starting with tools like Schema and Suite2P, but then there's also Cheetah, Cicada, Extract, and then more recently added is Opnist. Yeah, sorry, I haven't used that tool yet. And then finally, there's also a growing set of tools in the behavior space. Tools such as Sleep and Deep Lab Cut, which are for post estimation. But then there's also tools for data acquisition, such as Visio Mode, which is a touchscreen based task control system, or AR Control, which is another task control system based for Arduino. And so you have this growing ecosystem of tools and methods that are being available to you, and hopefully during developer days there will be more. And so I encourage you this week, if you're interested in any of these tools, to join us for the different sessions, like Ben already outlined, that are related to the tools. We have NeuroConf and NWB Guide coming up today, and then we have Ben presenting a little bit more detail on some of these tools during his processing analysis talk, and then we have talks on Dandy Archive, Data Join, Pineapple, and Sleep this week as well as NWB widgets. And so if you're interested in any of those, I encourage you to join those talks. If you want to learn more about our tools, you can go to the NWB overview page. We have here a glossary of all our core tools, so that's what you saw on the inner circle. And then there's also pages for a glossary of the visualization analysis tools and data acquisition tools. And so those will point you to the documentation of the appropriate tools, so you can learn more about them and how to use them. And then we recently also added now a community gallery, and that one has more information on interesting user projects in the community, projects that looked at data reuse, where you have notebooks that show how to reuse data, or collections of books that show you how to do data conversions, as well as other educational materials around NWB. And so NWB overview is in general a very good entry point for you to start looking at and exploring and finding information, and it will point you to the appropriate other documentation as needed. All right. So in this part of my talk, I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into the different pieces of our core data ecosystem and walk you through, what they do and what they're relevant for, so that you can better understand what tools you might need from that ecosystem, and just get a better understanding in general of the architecture of NWB as a standard. So one of the things that we did very early on in the design of NWB was to outline what are the core components of the NWB software and data ecosystem, both to allow us to design the software, but really one of the biggest impacts that this sort of, definition has is that it allows us to communicate appropriately, because we can define, what aspects are we talking about at a particular given time, and it allows us to also then say, okay, now we're talking about how to store data in the standard schema, but we know that data storage is an aspect, and we can then have that conversation as well without, getting a lot of confusion in the room, like which aspects of a particular topic are being addressed. Right, and so the key components that we have here is, on the one hand, the specification language, which is used to describe the schema of the data standard, and is what we use to formally model the data. Then you have the actual data standard schema, which describes the organization of neuroscience data and how we structure it. So this is typically what you as a user would think of as, this is the definition of the standard. Then you have the data storage, which really deals with how do you translate the schema structures to disk for most efficient storage and access. And then you have the data APIs, which really deal with how do you as a user want to interact with the data. How we store the data isn't always the same as how you want it presented on the front end. And so this is another very key aspect of this sort of development. And so in the next few slides, I'm going to walk you through these different pieces of this triangle. All right, and so first up, we have our specification language. And like I said, the specification language allows us to describe and model data. It defines data objects such as groups, data sets, links, and attributes. So a group, you can think of just as a folder on your file system. It's used to organize collections of objects. A data set really means an n-dimensional array with data type and so on. Links are, you can think of as a soft link on your file system. They can point to other groups or data sets. And attributes are just small metadata data sets that you can have associated directly with groups and attributes. Right? And so in the specification language, you then define the core features of these types, such as what is their name in the schema, what is the data type, what are the dimensions of your data sets, and so on. One central element that you will come across very quickly is this notion of neurodata types. If you're familiar with object-oriented programming, you can think of that as a class. And so what that allows us to do is to reuse types very effectively through both inheritance, where you can take an existing type. Let's say you have an electrical series and you have additional information about it. Then you can inherit from that electrical series and create a new type of electrical series that has all the same properties of the original series, but has additional features. As well as composition, where you can take a type and place it inside another type and reuse it that way. And this is the same language that we use to write extensions. So you will get in touch with the APIs for writing extension. If you write an extension, you will get in touch with the specification language through the APIs. All right, next up then is our data standard schema. And like I said, the schema uses the specification language to describe a large collection of reusable neurodata types for all the different areas of neurophysiology, and then organizes those types in a hierarchical structure to define ultimately the NWB file hierarchy. I'm going to use extracellular electrophysiology as just a quick example to orient you of how data is generally structured in NWB file. So at the top level, you have a set of folders for different types of data. You have general, which stores most of the general metadata about your experiments. There's acquisition for the raw acquisition data, processing for the primary processing results, and then several other folders such as intervals, which are allowing you to annotate data in ranges in your time. And so for extracellular electrophysiology, you would have in general metadata about your subjects, like you used a mouse for your experiment, you have the list of your experimenters, and then you have a table structure that allows you to describe your electrodes. Where were they located inside the brain, for example? and what device was used to record with these electrodes. And then at the next level, you have your acquisition data. For extracellular electrophysiology, that will be an electrical series. So you have an array that stores time by channel data. And so this is a concept you will come across very quickly in NWB. Most data is based around this concept of a time series. So you have a data array that has time as its first dimension. And then there's a large number of different types depending on the data modality that then specify how to store particular time series for electrical recording, optical recording, and so on. And then these time series recordings are also linked back to the appropriate metadata. So in the case of an electrical series, there is a scale alongside the channel dimension that will point you back to which electrodes were used to record the individual signals. And then similarly for the data processing, so in the case of extracellular, it will be detection of spikes. Those are then stored in the processing module. So you have another time series that, in this case, it's a spike event series that tells you when spikes were detected. And again, that is then linked back to the electrodes as well as the data that it was derived from. And then in the final spike sorting, that is stored in our units table. So you have a table structure that then tells you all the information that was derived from the spike sorting, right? And so this is just a very high-level introduction, but you will see the similar sort of flow for optical physiology, intracellular electrophysiology as well, where you have these kind of general base structures. You have tables that are used for storing the metadata, time series to store the raw and the process data, and then they're organized in this hierarchy. And so NWB provides neurodata types for most of neurophysiology data from extracellular, intracellular, and optical physiology behavior, stimulus data, and experiment metadata. And you will learn more about these in our sessions this afternoon, where we talk about the different data modalities and show you how to use them. So if you're interested in any of those, please join the appropriate talks on that. And then, as I mentioned, another key concept is this notion of NWB extensions. And again, extensions use the specification language to then describe new data schema to add new data types. And so the way it works, so in this example, we want to define an extension to describe the cortex of the brain. And so we use the PyNWB data structures for data modeling. It looks very similar as if you were to create files and folders, only now you're not creating actual data, you're just describing what they should look like. So you will create, let's say, a specification for a group where you say, in this particular group, I'm going to store data about the surface of the brain. And then you can add data sets incrementally to it. You define for each data set what their properties are. In this case, we have two data sets, one for storing the faces of triangles and one for storing the vertices of the triangles. And then we add all of that into a consistent namespace where you describe who created the extension, what's the version of the extension, and so on. And then all you need to do is export that structure, and it will be stored as YAML, and that's your extension. Once you have created that, you can immediately use your extension both in Python with PyNWB, where you just load your namespace, and PyNWB will create the classes for you to represent that data, and you can use them as usual with NWB and add them into the appropriate locations and then write the data as you normally would. Similarly on read, you can then either load your namespace explicitly or tell NWB to load it from the file, and then you will get back the same structures. You can always also write your own custom classes to interact with the data, but at least with this, you can immediately start prototyping and testing your data, and also easily share your data, even if your the other collaborator may not have your particular software installed, they can still read and write the data appropriately. And then similarly in MATLAB, you can automatically generate classes to represent your data and then immediately read and write the data as well, just from the description of the extension. And then if you're your extension is to be adopted more broadly, we have our NWB extension catalog where you can publish and share your extension. You always maintain ownership of the extension. All we record is metadata about the extension, where to find it, who the creator is, and so on. But you maintain ownership. It's not, but we're just indexing it in the catalog. And so extensions then are also a key concept for us to grow and expand the NWB data standard itself. Right? New components of the standard are born through the needs of the community. And so it starts by having a user that says, okay, I have this particular need, we create an extension, and then we are reaching out to the broader community, creating working groups to define the structures that will then more commonly and broadly be used. And so you are driving really the development of the standard through the creation of these extensions and by voicing your needs to us. So use your voice. Again, you will be able to learn more about the process for sharing extension in the presentation from the Technical Advisory Board. And then also Ryan on Wednesday will talk more about how to create extensions and how to apply them in practice. The next key component then is how do we actually store that data on disk? The schema only tells us how to organize it, and then the data storage needs to take those components that we define and translate them appropriately to disk. Currently, we're using HDF5 as one of our primary data storage backends. HDF5 has the advantage that it supports storage of large and complex data collections in a single file, so we can collect all that information into a single coherent container that you can easily share and publish. It is optimized for performance and large data I/O. It is supported across many different platforms and programming languages. And importantly, it targets long-term support so that your data remains accessible for a long time. And it provides many different advanced I/O features for such as lazy data load, chunking, compression, and so on, that allow you to optimize your data. But we're also working with other data storage modalities and exploring the integration of those. So for example, we earlier this year published HDMF-ZAR, which is a ZAR-based backend for storing NWB data. And so ZAR looks similar from a front-end perspective to HDF5. It also has this notion of groups and data sets, but the storage is very different. It will store data as collections of files and folders on your file system, so it's a more modular structure that is also more accessible for cloud computing. And so Data Joint is another example where we're interacting with more database-oriented structures for managing data. And again, we'll have some talks on the more advanced I/O features that Ben and I will be presenting. And then Data Joint also has a presentation tomorrow. And then finally, the last component are the data APIs. So this is what you will mostly at least start with and be faced with. So we have PyNWB and MatNWB, which are our reference APIs in both Python and MATLAB. Both APIs allow you to efficiently read and write and query your data. The APIs are interoperable, so if you create an NWB file in MATLAB, you can read it in Python and vice versa. And both APIs support advanced I/O features such as lazy data load. That means you can, let's say if you have a terabyte file on your disk, if you open it, it won't load all the data immediately into memory, but it only loads data on request. So that you can interact with very large data files, even on a system that may not have enough memory to hold all that data in memory. And then there's advanced options such as chunking compression that allow you to optimize the layout of your data on disk. Iterative data write to allow you to progressively generate data again to avoid having to load all data into memory, as well as support for data streaming to access data remotely, for example, from the Dandy archive. And then you have NeuroConv and Guide, which are conversion tools to allow you to convert data easily from a large number of different proprietary formats. And then, as I mentioned, the inspector for allow you to inspect your data after you converted it to ensure it follows best practices. And so I know this has been a lot of information, but I just wanted to give you a high-level overview. You will learn more about these different pieces as we go throughout the workshop. And so now at the very end here, I just want to talk a little bit about about the energy barriers in data standardization. Right? Adopting new technologies is not easy. It's both, technical challenges, but also just cultural challenges. And so there's different ways that we can help to overcome this energy barrier for adoption. On the one hand, there are incentives which are often coming from the funding agencies by providing funding for data sharing plans, for example, by defining the appropriate rules for data sharing. And then there is what we try to do here is, provide you guidance through outreach and support and help you adopt the standard. And then finally, there are carrots, the tools that are now accessible to you that you didn't have before, the things that make your day-to-day life easier in your work, that will hopefully, help you, reap the benefits of this data standardization process. And so we're trying to attack this problem on all of these fronts to help make the standards as useful for you as we can. Right? And so there's a broad set of activities that we do for outreach and training, both through in-person trainings like this one, as well as our online training. One interesting event that we just started last year is Neurodata Rehack that Ben spearheaded, and it's really about reusing data. It's about getting the data that's already online and making the most use of it, and it's a very exciting event. And I hope we'll see some of you at that event in the future as well. And then we do a lot of consulting with individual labs and as well as engagement with the community through our technical and executive advisory boards. If you want to learn more about NWB, we provide a broad range of online resources. If you want to learn about NWB as a project and our policies and so on, then you go to nwb.org. If you want to start diving into the standard itself, I highly recommend you start with the NWB overview page. And then you can always reach out to us with issues on our GitHub help desk and through Slack in our mailing lists. And then there's a broad range of other tutorials that are associated with our individual software tools, such as the Python and MATLAB APIs and so on. And then the documentation of our core standard data modeling tools and so on. But I would assume this week you will be able to stay at the top part of this pyramid. The NWB ecosystem continues to grow. And so a big part of our efforts is to manage the NWB ecosystem and to make sure that we're engaging with the tool community, that our tools are appropriate for them, that they can most easily integrate NWB with their tools and standards as well. And so we do a lot of efforts in engaging with the developers, including the developer days, but also in individual consultations and working with the developers to resolve issues and help them create plans for integration. Another area that we're working on for integration are integration with other online resources. This is something that is going to be a project in the developer days as well. And so this is about how can you link the terminology that you use in your file to the appropriate ontologies, for example, but also things like the brain atlases and so on. And so these are other areas where we are pursuing integration across different technologies. And then, like I said, developing and maintaining the core software and standard is a key aspect of what we do. And here we really pay attention to accessibility, reliability of the standard, stability of the software for you as you adopt it, to provide support for the community and ensuring that our software provides the functionality that you need. And again, use your voice. Only when we know about the issues you encounter or the features that are missing can we start addressing them. And this is what these events are about as well. And then, finally, I want to thank our team. These efforts are only possible through the voices of a very interdisciplinary team, and as well as your contributions. And with that, I'm going to hand it over, I think, to Cody. So now you get the actual stuff. Thank you.